with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, April 11th, 2023. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Jake Bittle, author of The Great Displacement, Climate Change and the Next American Migration. And later in the show, David S. Cohen, law professor, abortion rights attorney, will join us about the enormous legal battle over the abortion pill. Meanwhile, scholars are expressing skepticism that the Supreme Court, even with its extremist right tilt, will uphold the Trump judge's ruling banning the abortion pill. It's that flimsy. Mifepristone drug makers have signed a letter slamming the ruling. Good to have pharma money and interests on our side for once. The Louisville bank shooter has been identified as a former summer intern at the bank, and once again, another mass shooter who used an AR-15. A new Kaiser Family Foundation survey shows that Black Americans are twice as likely as white Americans to know someone killed by a gun, including suicide. Just a reminder that the Republican gun control or refusal to do anything on it is also racialized. The Nashville Council has voted overwhelmingly to reinstate State Representative Justin Jones until a special election is held. Justin Pearson could get a similar vote by his county board tomorrow. In the wake of ProPublica's explosive report about Clarence Thomas's patron Harlan Crow, the Senate Judiciary Committee will hold ethics hearings. Can we just do impeachment instead? A group of 40 professional athletes, including soccer star Megan Rapinoe, have signed a letter to Congress opposing GOP anti-trans sports bans. Two members of Congress, Republican Nicole Maliotakis and Democrat Earl Blumenauer, both bought bank stocks last month as they were working on the bank failures. Leaked U.S. intel documents indicate that Egyptian leader Sisi, supposedly a U.S. ally despite his human rights record, was working to sell rockets to Russia, maybe. Biden officially ended the coronavirus emergency, but also announced a $5 billion program to accelerate updated COVID vaccines. That better come with strings, that pharma doesn't gouge if they're getting our money. Commerce Department is looking into regulations for AI programs like ChatGPT. After progressives sank Hochul's original anti-labor and anti-abortion nominee, the New York governor has now tapped a progressive, Rowan Wilson, to lead the state's highest court. The DSA members in the state government here made a huge, huge difference. And lastly, thousands of right-wing Israelis, including some of Netanyahu's ministers, marched to the West Bank yesterday to show support for the illegal settlements. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, everybody. Sam is out for the rest of the week. He will be back on Monday. Matt is still out on grand jury duty. It's been a long time. It'll be a fun show once he does come back. And Bradley will, I don't know. I mean, by that point, will you just be half lobotomized or something like that.
I'm looking for the eject seat on my eject button on my chair. Hopefully, I'll just shoot through the ceiling.
I would like to see that too. I mean, that would be a sight for sore eyes. Just to get something.
See me vanish.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we spend a lot of time together.
Sure do.
We really do. I mean, I spend more time with you than anybody in my life. Do you think that that's true?
Yeah.
Yeah, we really do spend a lot of time together. But I still am not sick of you,
That's
which is
likewise.
Yeah, there we go. But like I saw that march to the West Bank, the article on it, and it was in the midst of my reading about what's been happening in Israel with these continued protests. I saw some protesters were chanting, at least a small group of them, support for the Palestinians brutalized in Al-Aqsa. And I was like, oh, wow, and now there's Israeli protesters marching to the West Bank. I mean, now they're going to be showing support for the Palestinian people living under the boot of apartheid. And then you just realize, oh, it's also like a bunch of Netanyahu's ministers showing support for the settlements, showing support for the stealing of Palestinian homes on behalf of religious extremists, colonialist Israelis. So 1 step forward, 2 million steps back when it comes to the struggle for Palestinian liberation. But let's talk about something that's happening here kind of in our own backyard, in my home state, Bradley's home state, Rutgers University. We are hoping to, and in the midst of trying to book someone from the union to come on to talk about this massive strike this week. But 9,000 professors, part-time lecturers, other workers in the union, grad student workers at New Jersey's State University. That's Rutgers. I know, like it's not University of New Jersey, but that's basically what it is. For people that might not know, it's a massive institution within the state of New Jersey. They're on strike, and this is the first action in the over 250-year history of Rutgers. It's enormously important. 3 unions are striking together on this. The Rutgers AAUP, AFT. They represent the full-time workers, full-time faculty, grad workers, the adjunct union as well, which represents the part-time lecturers, and the a bunch of other acronyms. I'm sorry, my notes are not as clear, but they also represent the biomedical and health students and workers, faculty, I should say, at Rutgers. So all of these 3 unions working together, striking. And in the lead up to the strike, the president of the university, Jonathan Holloway, sent out a letter publicly saying that the strike would be illegal. And people were like, what? And then they did it anyway, because you have the right to exercise your labor power in this country, and there was no real state law that he could point to. Apparently, he reiterated it in an email today, saying that they would have to take legal action, potentially, if there would not be an agreement in the near future. Now, Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey, who was a former Goldman banker, but he's kind of in the Pritzker model of like really rich guy who's ending up being a better, more progressive governor than anticipated, although let's be clear about his limitations. He, in this instance, though, unfortunately, did intervene or actually, fortunately, I should say, intervene to make sure that Rutgers did not take legal action to block the strike. So that's a good thing. And now apparently he's brokering some sort of talks here. So this is some footage yesterday of the strike on campus, and you can see the demonstrators chanting at Rutgers.
So let's see if we can send them a message. So I'm going to say no contract, and you all are going to say no peace. And let's make sure that the folks in Winans Hall in a little fancy spot over there, can hear us, okay? Let's see what we can do. No contract. No peace. No contract. No peace. No contract. No peace. No contract. No peace.
And then here's this great image that was caught, I believe, by some. We'd had Eric Blank on the show before, I think, but this taken by Eric Blank of these frat guys at Deke. Delta Kappa Epsilon. Hey, I had a Deke at my college.
Don't be a scab, bro. Don't cross the picket line, bro.
They like showing solidarity, fists in the air, frat guys for supporting labor here. Now, you could take a real cynical take and be like, well, that's because they get out of class. But at the same time, I'm not sure if that's the case. I don't actually feel that way. It just is really amazing that I think there's a level of labor solidarity amongst people under age 30 right now that is being consistently underestimated by people in power. But that's a wonderful, wonderful image there.
What jersey is that on the bottom right?
That's a Bucks jersey.
So it's probably a Brady jersey, I imagine, right?
Well, it's a 0. Pull it up again. What are we seeing here? No, it's 50.
50? Oh, I don't know.
Is that Vita Vea?
That would be this is the
That's a cool jersey to have.
This is such a classic. I mean, you obviously have the classic garish Rutgers jerseys. It
is
Raptors.
Vita Vea. Look at how smart I am. I knew that Vita Vea is number 50.
Ding, ding.
All
and
right.
the Raptors jersey, the garish 90s throwbacks. This is maybe the best frat pick I've ever seen.
It's a total frat pick, right? I mean, like, exactly. Vintage jerseys. Bros hanging out on the lawn on a nice day.
Let's go, boys. Let's go strike, boys.
Sitting on the roof. But that's really a great image and does show a level of class consciousness among young people that it would, even when I was in college, you would never have seen frat guys. And I went to maybe a more conservative school, but you would never have seen frat guys supporting strikers and unions.
I saw someone tweet basically that said to that same effect, basically being like, I think we can't necessarily understate, and this is obviously just one picture, but I mean just in terms of what we've seen all across the country, in terms of voting and in labor, like truly how much further to the left younger people have swung, even since, like you said, even since 2016, even. It is like there are current circumstances from those 7 years. I think it wasn't even just Trump or anything. I think it was also truly seeing the failures of American capitalism over and over again.
And
Bernie have actually radicalized these young kids to have this, like you said, this type of class consciousness. So, and even like you said, even if it's for them just wanting to get out of class, they still wouldn't have to necessarily get signs and support it at all.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I think that there is going to be a groundswell of pro-labor politics in maybe 10, 15 years, and I know that's way too long to wait, but when some of this generation begins to, Gen Z too, begins to take power there, that's Gen Z, right? Gen X is ahead of us? Yeah, we're millennials. Or at least I am. I'm a millennial. You are Gen Z, are you not? So are you?
I think I'm the tail end millennial. Actually, I can't. I was born in 1996, so I'm not sure if that's.
Yeah, no, you are. So you get to speak for this generation. That's the case.
I'm a geriatric Zoomer.
The point being is just good on those students and solidarity with the Rutgers strikers here. We'll be having more on this later in the week when we're hopefully going to be able to get some of the strikers on. But with that said, we are going to take a quick break. We will hear from one of our favorite sponsors, Cedar Seeds. And then when we come back, we are going to be speaking to Jake Bittle.
Hey, folks. One of today's sponsor is a product that it came out of an experiment that I did when a buddy of mine gave me some cannabis seeds, and I planted them, and they grew into big plants, but I didn't sex them properly. Apparently, there's male and female cannabis plants. And when you don't sex them, what you get at the end of that process is a bunch of seeds. But my loss, your gain, because my buddy was like, we can sell these. These are great seeds. So if you go to Cedars Seeds, SEDERS seeds.com, you can purchase a packet, 6 seeds. Check your local regulations to see if you're allowed to do, outdoor growing, your own growing. Some places you can, some places you can't. In New York, you can. 6 plants, and check it out. If you use the coupon code SEEDS, you're not only going to get the special Majority Report 15% discount that we got running right now, you'll also get free shipping. So check it out, cedarsseeds.com. Oh, and use that. Use that. You can just put your phone right up on that. Check it out.
We are back, and we are joined now by Jake Bittle, staff writer at Grist and author of The Great Displacement, Climate Change and the Next American Migration. Jake, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So your book really does center around people's firsthand stories here in the U.S., in terms of displacement from climate change. Hundreds of thousands of people in the United States displaced from their homes every year due to the effects of climate change. Like, how did you come upon that structure? Did you go into writing your book with that intention, both making it more of like a personal focus on people's experience and also making it US based?
Yeah, so I thought that it would be useful to, what I wanted to do at the start was just to try to document what the present tense, effects of climate change in the US were, because I thought that, people tend to conceive of it as a problem that will either happen, in the future, the distant future, or, somewhere else, like sort of very, very far distance across the globe. And especially with the, phenomenon of housing displacement or migration, I think people tend to think of it as something that is just not really like a US problem. And so what I was just trying to do is show, okay, after these climate disasters that, sort of appear and disappear from the news cycle relatively quickly, like what are the long-term effects on the communities where these disasters happen, and what ends up happening to people who get, temporarily displaced from their homes, how many of them make it back, and how many sort of end up moving somewhere else, whether voluntarily or involuntarily.
I really also liked how your title is a reference to the Great Migration, the 20th century migration of Black Americans from the South to other cities around the country. And that part obviously must have been intentional as well, right? Because your book does do a great job of focusing on the racial politics of climate displacement in this country.
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of trying to draw there's both a similarity and a distinction, right? And one is that, the similarity is that, like the Great Migration, climate migration in the United States, it cleaves people along lines of race and class very distinctly. But there's also a dissimilarity, right? Where the Great Migration was a relatively sort of one-directional movement of people from a very specific region of the country to a very specific other region. There was both a push factor and also a pull factor of, wages, the promise of better treatment in northern cities. And in the case of climate displacement, it's much more chaotic, right? Like, sort of happens everywhere in different parts of every region. And there's by no means like a single destination or coordinated direction of this movement. And so in the book, I kind of liken it to like when a pot is kind of like churning as it reaches a boiling point. It's more like there's a kind of chronic, generalized instability in certain places that over time leads people to fly off in all different directions. So there's both a really distinct similarity, and that's like the racial and class divisions. And then there's a dissimilarity, which is like, it's just not by any means so coordinated or recognizably directional as the Great Migration was.
Have you considered what Ben Shapiro posed years ago, that people who are experiencing flooding should just sell their homes and then that kind of solves everything?
It's a very funny video that I watched several times while writing the book. And it's very interesting because like there's an element of that that's actually currently baked into the actual functioning of the housing market in coastal places, right? Which is like when people do buy a home in a risky area, they sort of have the assumption that they are going to be able to sell it to someone else, not Aquaman, as the video says, but you know, somebody else will go. And in part, it's because there's just not enough information in the market about what the potential risks are, and we don't exactly know what the timeline is. So sea level rise, it's very difficult to predict. So when I start a 30-year mortgage in, you know, Miami, I don't really know how many 30-year mortgages there are left before the home is underwater. So yeah, I mean, there's a kind of like, I think I wanted to liken in the book to like when Wile E. Coyote like runs off the cliff and he doesn't notice that he's running on air until he looks down, but then as soon as he's down, he starts falling. So like that, you know, Ben Shapiro's mistake is actually kind of like really, really insightful in a reverse way, because it's actually the way that the market works right now. And at some point that will change.
Yeah, I mean, you particularly focus on it, I would say, or maybe the one of the more relevant parts to this particular talking point is your Santa Rosa example, where there was this massive housing shortage after wildfires. It's different than flooding, but it is an example of housing being at the forefront of this. And like my aunt lives in Santa Rosa. I have heard a lot about what that experience has been like through my family, like what facing those wildfires and how that created such insecurity there. But of course, for people on the front lines, it's devastating. Talk a bit about that chapter in your book, how wildfires affected the housing market there.
Right. Yeah, I think this is like it's a really, really important example, because there was a really, really dire existing problem in that area before the wildfire, which is that there's just this extreme shortage of housing. It had one of the lowest vacancy rates in the country, and we can go into all the reasons why that's true in Northern California and California generally. But that wasn't caused by climate change, obviously. But then you have a city where there's already really no vacant rental housing, and then suddenly 4,000 or 5,000 homes get wiped off the map, and those are, you know, not only apartments but also relatively large homes that were owned by relatively wealthy people. And so it took this existing problem and made it like, it sort of supercharged it, right? Where you have these wealthy people who lost their homes and they're looking for a place to go. So maybe they have a second home and they suddenly say, okay, well, we're gonna, you know, kick our renter out of our second home and live there, or we're going to go to our vacation home. And there's this downward pressure that happened where renters and people who had the least equity in their homes already, they ended up basically getting pushed out of the market because there was no longer space for people at the top. And so everyone got crowded down. And so I spoke to several people who, you know, they rented one apartment for every 6 months for years, and they paid, you know, 3 times what they'd paid before the fire. I spoke to people who just gave up on California. They ended up moving to places like Kentucky where they had family. So yeah, it's just like created this sort of insane chaos for years. And the prices have never really stabilized because it takes so long to rebuild that supply. And in the meantime, more people show up, you know, sort of undeterred by the fire. And so it's just like it's a mess, right? And that's the sense I was trying to capture in that chapter, of just like those first few months and that first year after the fire, people were paying, you know, 10 grand a month just to get a place to live. And there was just this like chaos and trauma of living through that market, almost more traumatic than the experience of fleeing the fire itself for many people.
The shock of having to essentially run through your savings just in a second to get housing after a climate disaster. Right, I mean, these states like California, New York, that have kind of blue legislatures need to get to the forefront of creating some sort of fund for people to not even relocate them, but get some subsidy for finding housing during that period, because like you speak about as well in the book, the rising insurance premiums in a lot of these areas of the country. I mean, this is just going to become a huge problem as more climate displacement happens. Insurance not being able, people being priced out of insuring their homes in this way. Can you talk about that dynamic?
Yeah, this has also been an issue in California and Florida especially, where basically the insurance companies, they have difficulty. They're answerable to shareholders, so they have to turn a profit, and they kind of can't turn a profit, or they say they can't, at least in California and Florida, because the amount they have to pay out in damages and claims and what's called reinsurance is more than they take in from the premiums, right? So basically they say, well, if we can't raise prices to really, really high levels, we're just going to kind of have to get out of certain areas, these like mountainous areas of California, for instance, where it's just like too risky, they say, to insure. And so the state, like California legislature and the insurance office there, they've tried really hard to tamp down this sort of like runaway problem in the insurance market. But it's really, really difficult to find out a way to bring the companies to heel without driving them out of the state altogether, right? Because they could also say, we don't want to write here, period, right? Let alone just like in those specific areas. But I think like in general, in all the places where this happens with different perils, fire, hurricanes, windstorm damage, what you kind of see is that there's the kind of, it really, really raises the threshold for who can afford home ownership, as opposed to renting, right?
Yes,
so
which is already insanely high given the quality of life for the generation that isn't.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think people who are my age will say, well, I couldn't afford a house anyway before climate change. But like there's this serious thing where like we think in the United States of like the middle class, upwardly mobile homeowner as somebody who saves up and they put equity in a home. It's an investment. And they're supposed to be able to keep up with it and then use that to like ascend the income ladder. And that because of, housing supply shortages, and then because of insurance, especially, it's kind of become like an illusion for a lot of people in the riskiest areas, right? Where the cost of insurance is just so much that it's impossible to keep up with most mortgages, even in, relatively affordable areas. That's like a serious, like spiritual problem for the country as well as a policy problem, where it's like this sort of much touted class of people, the middle class, it's sort of being eroded by the cost of climate change.
Yeah. Juniper J, one of our IMers, writes in and said, also consider that in Florida, homeowners cannot get home insurance. DeSantis called for a special session to address this, but passed fascist legislation instead. I wasn't aware of that homeowner insurance element. Is that something you're up on?
Yeah, so years ago, like about 3 decades ago, after a hurricane in 1992, the insurance market in Florida collapsed, and it was like, I know this is like a controversial way to put it. It was basically partially socialized. Like there's a public option for insurance, for windstorm insurance in Florida, and there's all these small private companies that still offer, but they have sort of started to flee in recent years as the cost of hurricanes has gone up. And like Juniper's right, there's a lot of people who can't get insurance except for through this public option, which is really expensive. It's not very good coverage, and everybody's going to it. So it's like this enormous burden on like the public purse. And I think the big question for the very, very, very conservative Florida legislature is how do you manage this system where basically the taxpayers are now footing the bill for, there's basically a public subsidy for insurance in risky places. And can they like turn it back into a normal market, a functioning sort of the free market that a conservative want? I kind of think the answer is no. But in either case, right, like it's like you're basically transferring the risk of people who live in really, really risky areas, not often through fault of their own, but you're transferring that to everybody, even people who don't own homes, right? So basically like you're taking a person who maybe owns a car in Orlando but rents an apartment, and their tax burden is in part the burden of like a person who owns a mansion in Miami Beach. So that's like a very, very difficult situation that I don't know that the legislature is quite equipped to address. They don't seem super interested in like a comprehensive solution.
It doesn't seem to be the case. But I guess let's talk a bit more about Florida, because that's your first chapter,
yes,
right?
That's where I'm from.
Oh, yes. There you go. Whereabouts?
Tampa, about an hour north of Tampa.
Tampa, there you go. So you start in Florida, telling the story of a guy named Patrick Garvey. This was, I guess, one of the 3 chapters in the start of your book where you're focusing on these human stories behind the weather disasters. What's Patrick Garvey's story?
Yeah, he came from Canada down to Florida, sort of just like looking for for meaning. And he spent about 5 years rehabilitating this tropical fruit grove that had kind of gone to seed. It was the property of this old hermit, and it became like this public sort of community resource on this island called Big Pine Key, which was like one of the last kind of like working class enclaves in the Florida Keys archipelago. And then this hurricane called Irma, just an astonishingly powerful hurricane, just all but, he had basically spent almost a decade restoring this grove, and right as he finished, basically the hurricane destroyed it, also kind of destroyed his life. His marriage fell apart. His kids went with their mother to Brazil, and he basically spent like 5 years kind of in like a dark night of the soul trying to restore this grove, only to kind of find that long term there's this other vulnerability that the island faces from sea level rise. So as the seas get higher, even independent of a storm, water will creep underneath, salt water will creep underneath the island, potentially making it very difficult to grow tropical fruit. But so I was kind of using it to show that there's like these two scales of vulnerability that people face in climate change, and the Keys is like a great example, where on the one hand, you have these giant kind of percussive disasters that completely destroy housing stock and render people without their homes. And then you have these slower moving disasters like sea level rise or drought, where people's sort of their ability to engage with the land and their ability to work, their ability to live sort of erodes over time. And the worst affected places are dealing with both of those at the same time. And in the case of the Keys, like the risk is really existential from both, that you might not really be able to, the place might not really be able to survive on a century-long time scale because there's just so much risk.
That's insane to think about. But I mean, obviously it makes total sense. Another place that you highlight that has is in a very vulnerable position is this indigenous community in Louisiana. Obviously Louisiana vulnerable in a variety of different ways. We know this from Katrina and more. Talk a bit about that if you don't mind, Jake.
Yeah, so this is I was trying to kind of look at the effects of sea level rise and coastal erosion on, coastal communities that aren't like big developed cities like Miami. So I went to this area about an hour and a half south of New Orleans. This is a long, very, very long-standing indigenous community, mostly made up of like inshore shrimp fishermen. And for a long time, it was extremely self-sufficient. Like they could raise cattle, they could grow their own crops, they could obviously get shrimp and get pelts from nutria to sell for fur. And then as the coast eroded, it just became impossible to sustain this kind of community, right? Like the ground was too wet for the cattle to walk on. It's too salty to grow the crops. And the independence of the community kind of fell apart. And the only available work, besides offshore shrimp fishermen, is working for the oil industry. And there's a kind of like deep resonance here that I thought was really important to highlight, where, there's both man-made climate change, which is like these global phenomena that are changing the way that weather works and water works. And that's happening there. But there's also this just sort of like straightforward human-caused environmental degradation that you can see right in front of your eyes. And so in the case of Louisiana, it was the oil industry that they basically sliced up the whole marshland so that they could build canals to get, benzene and oil in and out of the Gulf. And this was like there was a twofold problem where the oil industry, they destroyed the marsh, and then the global warming caused by the oil industry then further caused the seas to rise. So it's just sort of this nexus of a lot of the causes of climate change and just the way that we relate to land. And you had a community that had a deeply productive and sustainable relationship to this marshland environment that's basically been evicted over a century, by the actions of big oil.
Well, it really is, big oil creeping in. It's almost kind of shock doctrine on a micro scale where they're able to exploit the macro conditions created by climate change, which they contribute to, and then on the ground, they creep in on like indigenous self-sustaining communities for their own profit. That's a really good encapsulation of what we're dealing with, I would say. I also wanted to talk a bit about this North Carolina historically black city that was built on flood-prone land that you talk about in your book.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the fact that city was even built also is one of the long-term kind of structural climate exposure issues for non-white, non-wealthy communities in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, the town Lincoln City was built on land that I mean, essentially nobody else really wanted it, right? And this is true in a lot of other places in North Carolina, like where formerly enslaved populations they bought land that was too flood prone to use for agriculture, or that was how the white planters viewed it, right? And so this was a really like important one though, because a lot of times when you talk about the solutions to this kind of climate vulnerability, what people say is like, well, we can, give people money to move elsewhere or relocate them. And that's like one of the best tools that we have to fix this problem, right? If you get people out of the way, then they can't be hit by the hurricane anymore, right? And so that makes sense in theory, but this was like the first time that the US government really tried this was in 2000 after these two hurricanes hit this Black community. And basically they came in and said, well, we'll give you guys money if you leave and move somewhere else in the city. And, there was really no other option as the government saw it. But for the people in the community, they saw this as a really, really deeply traumatic event, right? Where they wanted to stay, they wanted to rebuild, and they were really attached to this land. It was the only place that most of their families had ever been able to own property or had ever lived in the postbellum era. And the government really didn't give them much of a choice. They said, well, we'll give you the money and you leave, right? And so this is called managed retreat. It's like a climate adaptation policy. But here it was a really, really, really tragic event, and it destroyed this really thriving community, which was very vulnerable. And a lot of the people, once they left and took the money, they really didn't fare so well. Their homes went into foreclosure because they couldn't keep up with the more expensive mortgage, or they lost track of their, community that they had once had, right? So I think it's like a cautionary tale for how to solve the problem of like, yes, you can move people, but there's a really, really, really deep intangible thing that people have with their communities and with the places that they live. And we have to respect that and find a way to honor that, even as we try to help people move out of the worst affected areas.
Right. I mean, in terms of that kind of mitigation for displacement, what do you see as some of the more viable paths forward, that included, as long as it's structured in a way that has puts vulnerable communities in mind, doesn't reverberate some of the already systemic issues? What are some of the best solutions you think?
Yeah, right. So I mean, there's basically two options, right? You can do that. You can pay people to leave and try to help them relocate through sort of like long-term stipends, maybe like relocation assistance. Maybe, like as is the case in a few places, they've tried this after the recession, where maybe places that are less vulnerable, like give people money to move there. I think Detroit tried it. Oklahoma City maybe tried it for non-climate reasons. And then there's a second option, which is like you try to make the place less vulnerable that people already are, right? So, all over the Gulf Coast, there's like homes that are elevated 12 or 13 feet off the ground. That tends to help with storm surge. There's all kinds of things you can do with what are called living shorelines, or like create parks or berms along the water to like help with the risk of flooding. And then, like you can retrofit homes themselves. So after Hurricane Andrew in 1992, Florida mandated like a really, really strong home construction standard that makes homes pretty resilient to hurricanes. You can do the same thing with wildfire. So you really have to decide between like armoring, so-called, or sort of resilience, as it's often referred to, or relocation. And that's a really, really difficult choice for communities to make. And I think the answer oftentimes is like, it's a little bit of both, where there's some areas where it's just so expensive and just it's impossible to find a way to protect. So you have to help those people move. And then there's some places like, for example, like downtown Manhattan, for instance, where it's very, very, very valuable, and it's worth almost an unlimited amount of money to pay to protect, right? So you could build berms around downtown Manhattan, or, the Army Corps of Engineers wants to create these storm gates that you could use to control flooding. So there's all kinds of things you can do. And the Biden administration has started to spend a relatively small, but historically, relative to history, relatively large amount of money on pursuing some of them. But we're still kind of like in kindergarten on it. Like, we don't really know what works, what doesn't. And I think like there's a certain amount of experimentation that has to be done with both resilience and managed retreat before we're going to know what are the, the best practices in this regard, because we've really never tried it very much.
Yeah, we're playing with fire, no pun intended, but obviously there's going to need to be a robust ramp up in the coming years, since we're not meeting any of our targets, and the effects are definitely being felt acutely right now. Jake Bittle, staff writer at Grist, author of The Great Displacement, Climate Change and the Next American Migration. We'll put a link to your book in the description, podcast, YouTube description, wherever you're watching this or listening, and at majority.fm. What's our website? It's majority.fm. I don't even know. Thanks so much, Jake. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the abortion legal battle with David S. Cohen. We are back, and we are joined now by David S. Cohen, board member of the Abortion Care Network, professor of law at the Drexel University Klein School of Law, co-author of Obstacle Course, the everyday struggle to get an abortion in America. David, thank you so much for coming on the show to explain this legal battle over abortion and the abortion pill right now, especially on short notice. Thanks so much.
Yeah, happy to talk with you.
For sure. So could you just give our audience a bit of a summary over what has happened over the last few days?
Yeah, so the way medication abortion works in this country, there are two drugs that are used. The first is mifepristone, the second is misoprostol. And the battle is over that first drug, mifepristone. It is only approved for abortion in this country. And so a group of conservative doctors challenged the FDA's approval of this drug. And they did it in a particular location in Texas where they knew they were going to get a very conservative anti-abortion federal judge. And he ruled on Friday afternoon that the FDA, when it approved this drug way back in 2000, that the FDA improperly approved this drug. And he put that approval on hold. Although he said it was going to wait.
Hi,
until
David.
Friday.
I'm so sorry. We're having some issues with the audio. We're just going to have to go for a quick break and try to fix it. I really apologize. Thank you.
Sorry.
We are back, and we are joined now by David S. Cohen on the phones, a board member of the Abortion Care Network, professor of law at the Drexel University Klein School of Law, co-author of Obstacle Course, the everyday struggle to get an abortion in America. David, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us about this landmark abortion ruling over the weekend.
Thanks for having me.
And I mean, I say landmark without any kind of positive association with it, because the underlying ruling absolutely has an incredible amount of holes in it, but also the ramifications and the fight that it's setting up is perhaps even more important. Could you give our audience a summary over about what has happened over the past few days?
Absolutely. So the way medication abortion works in this country is that there are two drugs. Mifepristone is the first drug and misoprostol is the second drug. These lawsuits were all about that first drug, mifepristone. The FDA approved it back in 2000 to be used in abortions, and a group of conservative doctors filed a lawsuit in Texas saying that the FDA unlawfully approved this drug and never should have done it because it's not safe according to them, and the FDA should have known that. Now, all of the science shows that this is an incredibly safe and effective drug, but this conservative group used anti-abortion studies and really sort of fake science to say to this judge that you should say that the FDA acted improperly. And on Friday afternoon, this judge, who really was handpicked, they filed it in a very particular location in Texas to get this very conservative judge, and he agreed with them. He said that the FDA acted improperly and that the FDA's approval needs to be stayed, which means put on hold, while the full case goes forward, because this is just an initial ruling. But importantly, he said, I will wait 7 days for this opinion to take effect because he's going to let the parties appeal the case. So for now, there's no difference in abortion provision in this country, but if Friday night comes and goes without any other courts weighing in, there might be.
Gotcha. So there's the 7-day waiting period, which allows the Biden administration to appeal. Talk a bit about the opinion and how this right-wing judge appointed by Trump, Matthew Kacsmaryk, in Texas, what did he use in terms of some of his reasoning behind this? I mean, my sense is that he simply basically copy and pasted what the plaintiffs were arguing.
Yeah, he really did. I mean, going into this, a lot of us feared that this judge, who has a very ideological and activist anti-abortion background, we feared that he would let that rule the day. We hoped that wouldn't be the case, but we feared that would, and our fears came true. He used the language of the anti-abortion movement. He talked about, instead of talking about fetuses, he talked about unborn human beings. He talked about abortionists rather than abortion providers. He accused the Biden administration of engaging in eugenics. He described the procedure by talking about babies being killed. So he really just bought the anti-abortion movement's arguments and language hook, line, and sinker. And he used studies that were not peer-reviewed, that were based on websites where people self-reported their being unhappy with abortions that they had, as opposed to peer-reviewed science that is respected in the field. He picked and he chose what he wanted, and he overruled the FDA. That's not the role of judges. Judges are supposed to defer to the expertise of agencies like the FDA, and he did the complete opposite of that.
And the exact opposite, right? Undercutting the FDA's authority to make these kinds of determinations, which has been long established, has it not?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time ever that a federal judge has said that the FDA improperly approved a drug. And so it sets a dangerous precedent, not only in the field of abortion, but in other areas too, where someone unhappy with a drug that the FDA has approved can just go to a judge like this judge who agrees with their ideology, and get this judge to overrule the FDA.
And how does this, well, okay, so Is this the same kind of reasoning that a case like West Virginia versus EPA was attempting to undercut? I'm trying to draw this connection between Republican efforts to undercut federal agencies' authority and make it so that their scientists, their experts have to go through the legislature or the Senate, often where it's much more easy to politicize the process. Is that a fair connection to make in terms of like the way the Republicans are trying to attack the administrative state and agencies like this for their agenda?
Absolutely. I mean, I think first and foremost, this is a case attacking abortion, but you're absolutely right that underlying it is an attack on the administrative state. Here you have Congress creating the FDA and saying you have the authority to develop the expertise in food and drugs and approve and issue your approval for things that are safe based on your expertise. This judge is saying, well, no, I get to do that. I get to second guess you, which undermines the entire point of an agency like the FDA and an entire point of agencies in general. So you're absolutely right by connecting it to this modern Republican Party attack on the administrative state.
And so just to flesh out Kaczmarek's invalidation of the FDA's approval of mifepristone, first for our audience, what is mifepristone as a drug, and how safe is it? Because I'm seeing articles saying it's safer than Tylenol, and you have a judge, in his opinion, essentially posting conspiracy theories and saying, oh, it could be really dangerous.
Yeah, it's an incredibly safe drug. The drug was approved in 2000 after years of study. It's been studied repeatedly since then because of the controversy around abortion. And, some say it's the most studied drug ever. And what the studies have shown is that it's safer than Tylenol, Viagra, and almost every other common drug out there. Now, keep in mind that when a drug is prescribed as much as mifepristone is, there's about more than 50% of abortions in this country take place using medication, which means about 500,000 people use mifepristone a year. That there are going to be complications. Absolutely, just like there's complications with Tylenol and Advil and aspirin, et cetera. But when you look at the percentages, it's safer than these other common drugs. It is effective, it is safe, and that's why the FDA approved it. But really, what it comes down to is that because it is effective at ending pregnancies, that's why this judge ruled against it. He is fundamentally opposed to the goal of this drug, which is to end someone's pregnancy. And because he's opposed to that, he found junk science to support his conclusion that this was unlawfully approved.
And some of the other elements of his reasoning I'd love to flesh out here. Like he used and hinged his decision on an anti-obscenity, anti-vice law from the 19th century that has long been laid to rest. How did he come to that? I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what the plaintiffs were arguing as well. But what was the underlying underlying kind of logic, at least, that he tried to put in terms of pen to paper in using the Comstock Act? Yeah, the Comstock Act dates 150 years ago. It was passed in 1873, and it's from Anthony Comstock. He was an anti-birth control crusader and an anti-vice crusader. And tucked into this federal law was also prohibition on abortion. Now, written initially, it was all about birth control, advertisements for birth control, and the like. But it also prohibits abortion, or prohibited advertisements for abortion, and importantly here, mailing any item that can induce an abortion. Now, in the 1920s and 1930s, this law was pretty much determined by federal appeals courts not to apply to legal contraception and legal abortion. It only applies to unlawful abortion. And for almost 100 years, no one really thought of the Comstock Act because those decisions sort of put it to bed.
the anti-abortion movement after Dobbs has been focusing on the Comstock Act as a way to ban abortion nationwide. Because if you think about it, pills get mailed. So if abortion pills get mailed that you can't, under the Comstock law, you can't mail those. But you know what else gets mailed? Everything that's in an abortion clinic that's used to induce an abortion, because those things aren't produced in the abortion clinic. They
Right.
go through the mail, they go through FedEx and UPS to get them to the center, to the clinic. And so the anti-abortion movement sees this law written 150 years ago as a way to try and ban abortion nationwide, because if you shut down the mail and express services as a way to transport things to abortion clinics, you shut down abortion.
Right. I mean, that's the point. I saw an article this morning in the Times where experts were saying that they think that this ruling is so out of control, so egregious, that the Supreme Court can't even uphold it because of the factual inaccuracies in the claim, the fact that they have in the past, at the very least, not challenge the FDA's authority when they've had the opportunity, even in recent years when the Supreme Court's been incredibly conservative. What's your sense of what this means if it's appealed to the Supreme Court through the extremist far-right Fifth Circuit as well?
I wish I had the confidence of some of the experts that you're referring to.
Right.
The federal courts are scary right now for anything having to do with abortion. And as much as the experts you were just referring to, I think are right in terms of how extreme this decision is, how much it undermines the FDA authority, and how much it is contrary to current law. When you're talking about an abortion case, a lot of that gets thrown out the window.
Mm-hmm.
And I fear that this Supreme Court that just overturned Roe v. Wade could see this as an opportunity to further their anti-abortion agenda, or even if they're not thinking that, sort of deviously, that just the fact that this has to do with abortion will color every other part of their legal analysis in ways that make it unpredictable.
Well, that is a little depressing, but predictable. I mean, I expected that answer, unfortunately, from you. Lastly, what is the harm here that's being claimed? Like, this is very unusual because my understanding is the plaintiffs here are doctors that are saying that prescribing the abortion pill creates complications with their patients. And yet they are the ones who are claiming harm in the suit, which doesn't seem to pass the smell test because that complications from medication is a quotidian problem for every doctor in this country.
Yeah, so you're exactly right with what they are claiming. They are not claiming that they prescribe these pills, but they are saying they see the patients that suffer complications, and so because of that, the doctors are harmed. And you're absolutely right. That is a normal part of medical practice, is that doctors see patients who have complications from other medical procedures and medical and pills. So if that is the basis to come into court and claim that we are harmed, then I'll get back to the point I made before. Anyone can challenge any drug, and the fear is that doctors will challenge COVID vaccines, doctors will challenge contraception, gender-affirming care medicine, PrEP for HIV, positive patients, and they will take those challenges to Judge Kaczmarek in Texas or anyone like him, and they will have a good chance of winning. It's really a way to undermine not only abortion in this country, but any FDA-approved drug that the right wing doesn't like.
Actual last question here then. In terms of oh shoot, I totally lost it. Dang, I had one more question about the abortion ruling. Oh well, David, I apologize. I totally escaped my head doing a bunch of different stuff today. So maybe if I filibuster for enough time, it'll come back. Maybe not. Darn it.
You're talking about the harm to the doctors and the other drugs.
Yeah. Right. Ay, ay, ay. All right. Well, I've lost it, unfortunately. But, oh, here we go. There we go. I did it. I filibustered enough.
Good.
So this is a two-parter here. How does this affect gender-affirming care, potentially for trans people, if this kind of ruling is adopted by the Supreme Court? Because that could also affect that kind of the FDA's authority over certain kinds of drugs. But secondly, what is your opinion on what Ron Wyden and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have said, which is that the Biden administration should essentially ignore this?
So on the first question about the impact on gender-affirming care, I think that goes to this idea that when you have politically motivated judges ruling on these contentious issues in ways that are not supported by law or science, everything is a threat that the conservative movement disagrees with, because they're going to attack gender-affirming care in similar ways, find a judge who will rule for them, and have the support of the appellate judges who review the case on appeal. So it's scary way beyond abortion.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of Senator Wyden and AOC and the things they've said, I think I completely support the end goal they are looking for. I don't like the language of ignoring this decision. Not that I'm opposed to ignoring judicial decisions when they are needed to, but it's important to understand that the decision from the judge in Texas does not require the FDA to do anything. All it says is that the drug's approval is put on pause. The FDA can respond to that in ways that aren't ignoring, but rather say, okay, well, this is an unapproved drug, but we're going to let this unapproved drug in the marketplace. This has happened before. The FDA does this with unapproved drugs when those drugs are safe and effective, which this drug is. And the FDA can say, just like a police officer doesn't pull over everyone who's going 58 in a 55-mile-an-hour zone, that we're using our discretion not to go after these drug companies who are continuing to market and distribute this drug because it is safe, it is effective, and we've got other problems that we need to use our limited resources on. And so that is recognized in law as an option for the FDA. The Supreme Court has approved this kind of discretion for decades. And so to me, it's a much more convincing argument to the Biden administration not to ignore the decision, but rather to use the tools at the FDA's disposal, to use its discretion to recognize this decision, but in their discretion say we are enforcing other laws because those are the priority.
All right. Well, that is a very reasoned response on that front, and I really appreciate your time, David S. Cohen. His work is over at he's a professor of law at Drexel University Klein School of Law. You can read his book, Obstacle Course: The Everyday Struggle to Get an Abortion in America, and he's a board member over at the Abortion Care Network. Thanks so much, David. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks. With that, we are going to wrap up the first part of this program and head into the fun half, where my friend Dan from the internet will be joining us. You guys may know Dan from his show Power Report. More people should be watching it. Maybe let's bring Dan in and we can introduce him before we head into the fun half. The number is 646-257-3920. We have already called into the phones, and we will be taking some of your phone calls, reading some of your IMs, and responding to some clips, which we'll be doing with my dear friend Dan. Check out the Power Report, and we'll bring him on in a sec to pitch his show. Maybe he'll tell us some stories of his time as a producer on the Jimmy Dore Show. Oh, we have him right now. Look at that. Yeah,
Look at that.
I wanted to, or what? Not the Jimmy Dore Show, the aggressive progressives over at TYT. So you worked with Jimmy Dore, and I want you to tell people stories about that in the fun half. I kind of sprang that on you, but there you go.
Good to see you too, Emma. I mean, I was kind of pitching this as like, honestly, this is awesome for me personally as an individual, as Dan from the internet, the character, and Dan Evans, the individual, because like.
Yes.
we were the kids of TYT, and we've done our own thing. Things exist as they are, but no, I love doing a show, an hour, a fun half with you.
Yeah.
Also, shout out Bradley, you're awesome. I I had so much fun making that lock graphic for y'all.
Yes.
Appreciate y'all.
People who watch ESVN will know that during the NFL season, we did a competition with our locks, and Dan put together a graphic for us very kindly out of the goodness of his heart, which was a big hit.
Yeah, when you came on, I was like, oh wait, should we play it? Should we run it? It doesn't really make sense in this context.
Maybe
but
in the fun
Dan.
half, but yes, thank you. I just figured, again, it's just been myself and Bradley for the past few days, so we got to get a fresh voice in here so I can bounce some ideas off of him in the fun half. We can talk about Elon Musk. We can talk about Steven Crowder and Alex Jones teaming up, and more. Lots of fun clips. But first, Dan, tell people about the Power Report and your work outside of TYT and other stuff that you do. Plug away.
Oh no, I appreciate the opportunity. So yeah, thank you, Emma. For folks who don't know, for a lot of folks who I'm surprised do know, I've worked kind of behind the scenes with TYT for this week is J.R. Jackson's 20th anniversary. I just recently learned that J.R. Jackson's 20th anniversary is the same year as my 10th anniversary. I first visited TYT in February of 2013 to age myself a little bit. But I worked behind the scenes a little bit. I flirted with being on camera a little bit. My current mission, in addition to doing my nonprofit day job, which I'll talk about in the future, not on the show, but I am trying to build a worker cooperative model of a content company that produces political things similar to what you do, trying to weave politics into other realms of cultures, like what you do wonderfully on ESVN. I do on Audio Face with my good friend Sean, who's a big Majority Report fan who might be watching. And we review new music every single week. I know you've been liking that new Lana Del Rey record, and we'll probably talk about even more.
Pretty nice.
Again, it's about my hometown, and she taught me stuff about my hometown I didn't even know. I did not know that there was a tunnel underneath Ocean Boulevard. I've gone around Ocean Boulevard all the time. I'm a big Pike head all the time. Long Beach fans.
So you got to check it out then. You got to check it out. Now,
yes.
It's going to become a Lana Del Rey site, right, for fans and stuff.
Well, the annoying thing is that the tunnel is sealed up, and probably should be for seismic reasons. But apparently there is, I live like a capitalist every single day, Jenk. Thankfully, there's a company in Canada, I believe, that is buying the site where the tunnel used to be, and part of the thank God for statism. The city of Long Beach is forcing the owner of the new site to revitalize and retrofit the tunnel so that they can rebuild it. So give it a couple years, but you will once again be able to see Lana Del Rey's tunnel underneath Ocean Boulevard. But yeah, check out youtube.com/audiofacepod for all the music stuff we do. We have a new series where people build Legos while talking about their song lyrics. It's really awesome. We have some really great artists on there. And yeah, Power Report, I try to do a show about leftist politics from as many different voices as I can. So this week I'm trying to bring gender non-binary folks onto the show so that we can talk about some of the more recent issues. But I like to bring on people of different perspectives on the left to kind of provide that kind of panel atmosphere, because producing TYT power panels was definitely my favorite part of the job. That was super fun.
Bringing in new voices and stuff like that. So we'll talk about all this and more in the fun half. Check us out. Again, the number is 646-257-3920. Check out the Power Report. Check out Audio Face. All of Dan's excellent work. Now we're going to be making fun of right-wingers. See you in the fun half.
Yeah.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy.
Alpha males are back.
And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman!
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. We're back with my buddy Dan from the internet of the Power Report and Audio Phase podcast. All right, so let's get right into it here. We both worked at TYT at the same time. I would say we were considered to be like pretty good buddies. I mean, I consider us that, and we
some would say
we would strategize a little bit. We worked